In the world of high finance, Marcus Blake measured everything. His success was his armor, built on cold logic and ruthless metrics that calculated net worth before learning names. His empire stood tall on the promise of infinite returns, insulating him from ordinary human concerns. But outside his glass-walled boardroom, desperation birthed a different kind of innovation. Elise Morgan, a single mother driven by grief over her brother's completed suicide, built a mental health app, a lifeline born of necessity. He rejected her pitch instantly.
A charity, not a business.
He didn't know that the very app he dismissed was the only thing standing between his daughter, Claire, and oblivion. When fate forces the millionaire and the single mom together, Marcus must confront a devastating truth: that the metrics that truly matter can't be quantified on a spreadsheet. This is the story of how healing a single life became a mission worth more than all the wealth in San Francisco.
Before we start the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. Enjoy the story. Marcus Blake stood at the head of the glass-walled boardroom on the 47th floor. His reflection fractured across windows that framed downtown San Francisco like a conquered territory. He carried his 6'3" frame with the coiled precision of a man who controls everything. His slate-gray eyes calculated net worth before learning names, silver threading his dark hair like early frost. Measured, emphasizing power and wealth. Beyond the glass, the city sprawled beneath October fog, thousands of lives reduced to miniature ambition from this height. People small as insects, their struggles invisible from his carefully constructed distance. He'd built this view through ruthless pattern recognition. Identify inefficiency, apply capital, extract return, feel nothing. The formula had never failed him. Clinical, detached. "Next," he said, his voice carrying the same inflection whether dismissing a waiter or a founder's dream. It was the emotional range of a man who'd trained himself not to feel. Marcus commanded the glass boardroom, dismissing founders with surgical precision. His associate pulled up the pitch deck on the screen. Marcus's pattern-matching brain registered the details in seconds, processing faster than most people could read. Another mental health startup. Another founder who believed good intentions compensated for weak market analysis and the reality of capitalism. The woman's photo showed someone in her 30s, dark-eyed, intense, tired. Elise Morgan. Single founder seeking seed funding for an app connecting people in crisis with trained volunteers. Her traction showed compelling engagement metrics, but Marcus didn't bother to advance past slide 7 of 23. Impatient, judgmental. He rejects Elise Morgan's mental health app pitch without reading it fully. In his mind, she was simply another idealistic nobody wasting his time. Crisis intervention requires human labor that grows linearly with users, he stated. The unit economics don't work at the margins we need. It's a charity, not a business. The logic was airtight. The decision was correct. The partners trusted his instincts because his instincts generated the kind of returns that insulated you from ordinary human concerns. He moved immediately to the next deck. Marcus Blake, the architect of distance, had applied capital, or the lack thereof, and moved on. He had no idea the decision he just made was about to mean nothing at all. The lifeline. The city was silent to Marcus Blake, but 7 miles away the silence was deafening to his daughter. Late that night, Claire Blake stood on the Golden Gate Bridge, phone in her trembling hand, searching desperately for the app her father had rejected hours earlier because it didn't scale. Claire, 16, inherited her father's height but carried her late mother's artistic soul. Her dark hair obscured eyes that held too much pain for her age. Her mother's death had left her with a father physically present but emotionally absent, and a depression that swallowed her whole. Standing on that ledge, she was convinced that no one would understand. Deeply vulnerable, focusing on isolation. She opened the rejected app anonymously. Desperation had led her to a platform designed by grief and born of innovation. She was reaching out into the void, and someone answered. She reached a crisis counselor. Urgent, immediate focus on the connection. The text chat, powered by the metrics Marcus had dismissed as a charity, became the lifeline that held her. In the terrifying isolation of the darkness, that single human voice, speaking through an app, proved that surviving was possible. The life Marcus believed was safely insulated by his wealth, the only thing that actually mattered, was saved by the woman whose dream he had casually crushed. Profound relief, circling back to the irony of Marcus's failure. That single voice, a stranger on the other end of a phone line, was the only one that found her when everyone else in her world had failed her. The voice offered proof that someone could hear her. Slowly, carefully, the counselor began to talk her back from the bridge ledge. Empathetic, careful, highlighting the miracle of the connection. The veneer of Marcus Blake's success shattered completely upon his arrival at the hospital. He rushed into the sterile, fluorescent halls, his expensive suit rumpled, his calculating eyes wide with the primal terror of a father. Urgent, focusing on external signs of internal chaos. The police were there. They confirmed the sequence of events. They explained that they had traced Claire's crisis session, her lifeline, back to the source. The source was a mental health application, matter of fact, setting the stage for the revelation. Marcus learned that Elise's platform saved his daughter's life. The app he had rejected hours earlier, dismissing its human cost as poor unit economics, was the instrument of his salvation. The charity he scoffed at had become his daughter's single, critical anchor. The shock was a physical blow. The empire he built to insulate himself had crumbled, and the only thing standing between his daughter and oblivion was the idealism of a single founder, a woman he had barely given 5 minutes of his time. The truth hammered him. The metrics that mattered couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. Intense self-condemnation. He understood everything now. The cost of his cold logic, the depth of his neglect, the profound mistake he had made in that glass boardroom. His guilt was a flood, demanding immediate redress. Internal turmoil. Yet there was a devastating gap in the story. Elise Morgan, the woman whose platform saved his daughter's life, whose vision had been validated by the ultimate metric, human life, didn't know who the dismissive VC was. She did not know that the man now reeling from gratitude and desperate guilt was the same man who had tossed her pitch aside without reading it fully. Dramatic irony, setting up future conflict. He was a father saved by a miracle, and a capitalist consumed by shame. He knew her name. She did not know his face. And Marcus knew with chilling certainty that this secret would not, could not last. Concluding, anticipatory dread. Consumed by a flood of guilt, Marcus Blake tracked Elise Morgan to her cramped office. The room was a universe away from his glass boardroom, small, utilitarian. Clearly the labor of a woman working 80-hour weeks and living on ramen and coffee to build her mission. He arrived, his tailored suit a stark, uncomfortable monument to the wealth that had failed him and nearly cost him everything. He saw her, Elise, moving with the quiet intensity of someone who'd survived what breaks others. Her dark eyes saw through pretense and wealth to the human underneath,
Marcus couldn't speak in metrics or quarterly reports. He could only speak from the deep, terrifying wound of nearly losing his daughter. He saw his way out of the crushing shame. Money. He offered unlimited funding.
I owe you. I owe the app. Take whatever you need. Unlimited funding. I need to make this right.
Desperate, attempting to buy forgiveness. But Elise Morgan was not looking for a handout, and she certainly wasn't looking for a savior. She refused his money. She saw past his generous offer to the source of his rush, cash thrown at a conscience. Firm, establishing her moral ground. Elise, fierce, unyielding. No, Mr. Blake. I refuse your money. My work is not a penance for your guilt. Emotion, authority, unyielding pride. She didn't know he was the dismissive VC, but she immediately understood the nature of his transaction. Her work was built from the grief of her brother's completed suicide. It was born of desperation. It wasn't something to be dismissed one day and bought back the next. Emphasizing her earned authority, she demanded he actually understand what the app does, demanding he step into her world before throwing cash at his conscience. She needed accountability, not charity. Marcus, the man who controlled markets, suddenly realized he had absolutely no control over the moral terms of this negotiation. Marcus Blake, having been stripped of the ability to buy his way out of guilt, had no choice but to accept Elise's terms. Work, resigned. He insisted on shadowing her for a week, desperately seeking to prove he was serious, to prove that he understood a value that existed beyond the balance sheet. Determined, hesitant. Elise didn't give him an orientation on fundraising. She didn't offer a seat at a strategic planning table. She assigned him the overnight crisis line. Direct, challenging. He sat alone in a small, windowless room, the suit that cost a fortune feeling like a heavy, ill-fitting costume. Marcus, the master of market risk and maximizing returns, was now facing human risk and maximizing connection. The screen before him was starkly different from his Bloomberg terminal. There were no stock tickers, no financial models, only the queue of raw, anonymous pleas for help. Here, the only currency was trust. Thoughtful. He hears raw desperation. It was unfiltered, immediate, and utterly terrifying. A teenager writing about the exhaustion of living, a parent contemplating their own failure. He was hearing the deepest, darkest moments of lives he had previously reduced to demographic statistics. Intense. The cries for help shattered his venture capital metrics. There was no predictable growth pattern here, no efficiency to be capitalized upon, no revenue to be extracted. Just the painful linear reality that crisis intervention demands genuine, unending empathy. This was a world where his ruthless logic was useless. This was where his true education, the one that might save his soul, began. Awe, reluctant acceptance. Marcus, the man of metrics and immediate fixes, was failing. His controlling solution-oriented instincts failed every caller. He tried to interrupt, to analyze, to offer strategies, everything except what they actually needed. Elise watched him struggle from the doorway. She saw his desperation to fix the pain because fixing was the only way he knew how to process the world. But in the fragile space of crisis, fixing was just another form of rejection. She moved quietly behind him. She didn't scold. Instead, Elise began to train him on active listening. Your controlling instincts are failing every caller, Marcus. Don't fix it. Don't offer solutions. Right now, you just need to guide them through empathy, not solutions. She placed her hand over his on the mouse, stopping him from clicking away or typing an immediate recommendation. His large, rigid hand was covered by her smaller, warmer one. It was a physical guidance, but a deeper lesson in vulnerability. She guided him through mirroring their language, through acknowledging their fear without minimizing it. Her touch was purely professional, instructing him to type words of recognition instead of strategy. Yet, the touch lingered. His controlled world, his expensive armor, softened beneath her touch. He felt the warmth, the intimacy, the authority earned through grief. The physical contact spoke what words couldn't yet. A mutual reliance. Marcus, who had walled himself off with wealth, finally felt something real and immediate, a connection earned not by a contract but by a shared, painful moment of learning. The reflection of pain. While Marcus struggled to master the empathy of the crisis line, his daughter found her own path toward healing. Claire, yearning for connection and understanding she hadn't found at home, secretly joins a teen support group Elise facilitates. The group met in a dimly lit room, a space free from judgment. Claire, quiet and observant, sat listening to the raw, shared vulnerability of her peers. She saw that her pain wasn't unique. It was a devastatingly common language among her generation. Marcus, continuing his shadowing, was present, a silent observer in the corner, his presence tolerated only because Elise sanctioned it. Here, his wealth and status meant absolutely nothing. He was simply a man listening. He hears the stories, the pressures, the loneliness, the crushing weight of expectation. Stories of self-harm, of silent battles in luxury homes, of feeling utterly invisible. These were the struggles he'd never thought to hear, never imagined existed within the protected confines of his world. As he listened, the walls Marcus had built around his emotions began to crack. He starts to see his daughter's pain reflected in other kids' stories. The charcoal-stained fingers, the distant silence. It wasn't just teenage moodiness. It was a cry he had refused to acknowledge. The venture capital metrics that defined his career, growth, efficiency, return, were utterly useless here. The only metric that counted was survival, bought by the courage of these children to share their trauma. Marcus realized that saving Claire meant more than just paying the hospital bills. It meant first saving himself from the isolation his success had created and maintained. He needed to understand this pain, to bridge the distance. The late-night work sessions had begun to blur professional lines. Working side by side in Elise's small office, Marcus and Elise were bound by shared mission and mutual vulnerability. The hours stretched until dawn, fueled by ramen and necessity, dissolving the strict boundaries Marcus once prized. They were deep into redesigns for the parent expansion, his hand perhaps lingering on her shoulder a moment too long, her gaze holding his a fraction longer than necessary. In this exhausted, shared space, they were simply two people dedicated to a purpose that mattered. Then the real world intruded with a jarring lack of respect. Elise's ex-partner appeared at the door, demanding overdue child support. It was a humiliating, explosive interruption, a public display of the precarious life Elise fought every day to shield her daughter from. Marcus, witnessing the scene, reacted instantly using the only tool he still understood: wealth. In a flood of instinctual guilt, he grabbed his checkbook. Quietly, with force. "Here, take it. This is settled." He wrote a check,
a sum designed to erase the problem entirely. But before the ink could dry, Elise snatched the paper back. Her eyes, usually warm and intense, were now blazing with fury, not at her ex, but at Marcus. She tears it up. Firmly, quiet rage. "Tear it up, Marcus. I will not accept your check. I'm not a charity. I don't need rescuing." The small office grew silent. Marcus watched the shredded pieces drift to the floor. He finally began to understand dignity versus charity. His money was not a bridge. It was a barrier. Elise wasn't asking him to pay off her life. She was demanding that he respect her capacity to build it. He realized that true partnership meant respecting her struggle, not erasing it. The confession and the penance. The intimacy, earned over sleepless nights, demanded truth. The secret Marcus carried, a weight heavier than his entire portfolio, could no longer be contained. He was about to shatter the trust they had built, but he knew the confession was the only path to genuine partnership. He took a slow, deep breath, the admission costing him everything he had left of his old, calculated self. "Elise, I'm the VC who rejected your pitch. That day, the day my daughter nearly died, that was me." His betrayal was visceral. The man whose compassion and commitment she had grown to admire, whose hand had rested on her shoulder just hours before, was the same cold figure who had dismissed her brother's legacy as poor unit economics. The years of rejection flooded back in a wave of white-hot anger. "You dismissed my brother's legacy. You judged my grief as weak market analysis, just to go home and face your own trauma. You sat here, and you let me teach you empathy." She was ready to walk away, to end everything. But Marcus was prepared for this. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded, worn sheet of paper. It was the transcript of Claire's session, the cold, typed record of the night his daughter was saved. He had carried it, reading it every night, like penance. He didn't speak. He just offered the transcript. As Elise read the anonymous, vulnerable exchange that had saved a life, her anger began to dissolve into a painful, gut-wrenching recognition. The words on the page, the voice that saved a child, were proof that their needs were terrifyingly interconnected. It was the only thing that could bridge the chasm his confession had created. The interconnectedness. Elise Morgan stood frozen. The transcript, the proof of Marcus's penance, had validated her app, but deepened her agony. She saw her life, her brother's legacy, and her fierce independence all betrayed by the very man now seeking her partnership. She nearly walks away. The anger was too clean, the betrayal too sharp. To walk out would mean protecting her heart and her mission from the complication and compromise Marcus represented. But before she could move, a fragile intervention occurred. Claire appeared. The 16-year-old who had been listening from the periphery, seeing the fallout of her father's confession, moved past the broken contracts and the painful secrets. She moved straight to the woman who was only a voice to her. "The voice that saved me. Thank you." Claire hugs Elise. It was a physical, undeniable validation that transcended the business deal, the guilt, and the betrayal. In that moment, Elise was no longer just the founder of the rejected app. She was the essential person who had reached into the darkness and pulled back a daughter. The three stand in the cramped, silent office. Marcus, watching his daughter cling to the woman he had dismissed, finally saw the true metric of his failure and his salvation. Elise felt the profound weight of her work and the crushing inevitability of their shared fate.
It was a moment of painful, transformative recognition. Marcus's desperate need for forgiveness, Elise's need for validation and resource, and Claire's need for the lifeline that bound them all. They stood, a fractured, accidental family, finally seeing how deeply interconnected their needs had become. The betrayal was real, but the bond forged in survival was stronger. The moment of transformative recognition demanded a final, brutal honesty. They stood, bound by a daughter's survival and a shared mission, but separated by years of unaddressed personal history. To move forward, the deepest wounds had to be exposed. Marcus, stripped of his VC armor, finally revealed the foundation upon which his carefully constructed empire rested. I built this empire after my own teenage suicide attempt. I didn't talk about it. I walled myself off. And in doing so, I walled off my daughter. He confessed that the relentless pursuit of wealth, the very mechanism that defined his cold success, was merely a scar he had cauterized with capital. He revealed that building empires was easier than building connection, that success was meaningless if you're alone at the top. Elise met his confession with her own. Her authority and intensity were earned through grief. She shared the trauma that was the genesis of her life's work. The app was birthed from grief. My younger brothers completed suicide at 19. I built this from his final note. Desperation births innovation, but for me, it birthed a lifeline. In that small, quiet office, their histories aligned not as business partners, but as survivors. Marcus needed to learn that vulnerability isn't weakness. Elise needed to reclaim her belief that the right partner existed both in business and life. They were unified by the deepest, most painful form of empathy: shared trauma. Unified by shared trauma and a common mission, Marcus and Elise moved into a new phase. Their first joint project was deeply personal, an expansion for parents designed to reach others like Marcus, who had built empires but walled off their children. They worked side by side through long nights, the exhaustion blurring the last vestiges of their professional distance. Marcus with his strategic mind, and Elise with her profound empathetic insight, were a formidable and complementary team. The gentle tapping of a pen on paper, a shared, quiet chuckle. In the quiet intensity of their shared focus, physical intimacy replaced formal conversation. As Marcus leaned over the data, his hand steadies on her shoulder. It was a gesture of support, acknowledgement, and protection. A covenant spoken entirely without words. Elise didn't pull away. The touch lingered. It spoke what words couldn't yet. An understanding earned not by a contract, but by seeing each other's deepest wounds. It communicated, "I see your value. I won't let you fall." The physical proximity was a direct consequence of their emotional vulnerability. Marcus was learning that building connection was easier than building walls. Elise was learning that accepting help wasn't failure, and that the right partner, in business and in life, could see her value. They were not just building an app expansion. They were building a new foundation for their lives, brick by quiet brick, bound by the fragile hope of healing, and the certainty of a love that was being earned through immense pain. The integration of their lives continued, marked by small, profound steps. Claire, now an active participant in her own recovery and deeply connected to her voice of salvation, initiated the next step. She asked Elise to her school. Softly, "Elise, my school is having a therapy presentation for parents. Can you speak? I want them to hear your voice." It was the ultimate seal of trust. Elise, whose authority was earned through grief, accepted. Marcus went too, not as an investor or a parent, but as a student. Elise's footsteps approaching a stage podium, Marcus followed. Marcus watched Elise command the room. She stood before the parents and students, not in a power suit, but with a quiet, undeniable presence. She spoke about building lifelines, about choosing honesty over silence. She spoke with vulnerability. In the glass boardroom, Marcus had mistaken that deep well of vulnerability for weakness, for a lack of scaling ability. Now seeing her engage with the fear and confusion in the parents' eyes, he recognized the truth. He saw the strength he'd dismissed. Vulnerability was not fragile. It was the ultimate, commanding strength. It was the ability to stand exposed and still inspire action. This woman, who had built a mission from a suicide note, was capable of moving markets in a way his calculations never could. Elise exactly, his breath catching slightly. He felt something crack open within him. The final fortified wall he'd erected around his heart, the armor of success and detachment, finally gave way. In that room, watching Elise, he saw not a founder seeking his capital, but the partner he needed to save his life. Concluding on the internal transformation, the presentation was over. Elise had commanded the room with a strength Marcus finally recognized, and the last of his armor had fallen away. But the evening was not yet finished. Claire, the silent orchestrator of their deeper connection, moved decisively. With the uncomplicated acceptance only children offer, she manufactured their solitude, ensuring that her father and the woman who saved her were left alone. Sound, heavy rhythmic rain drumming on a car roof, isolating the interior space. The sound of a key turning, but the engine remaining off. They found themselves in Elise's car. Outside, the rain was drumming a heavy, quiet rhythm on the roof, isolating them completely from the world they had just conquered. The air inside was charged, thick with the unspoken recognition of what they had built together. Trust forged in trauma. Respect earned through vulnerability. Marcus, once the master of calculated risk, knew this was a moment that defied all metrics. He was no longer demanding. He was tentative, respectful, seeking explicit consent for a connection he desperately wanted but felt unworthy of. Focusing on Marcus's humility. Tentative, seeking permission. "Can I kiss you? Everything we've earned. I don't want to rush what's been earned through pain." Silence, save for the rain. A deep breath taken and held. Elise didn't need words. The question wasn't about permission. It was about acknowledging the emotional gravity of the distance they had traveled. She answered him with the immediacy of certainty, responding not with a yes but with action. She answers by closing the distance first. Marcus tasted like tears and forgiveness. His hands framed her face like she was precious and breakable. She gripped his shirt like he was real and staying. Neither rushed what had been earned through pain and mutual saving. It was the kiss of two people who finally understood that their survival was inextricably linked. In the confined intimacy of the car, with the rain isolating them from the world they had just conquered, their distance finally evaporated. The cold logic of the boardroom and the desperate necessity of the crisis line yielded to a profound, fragile connection. They were two people defined by loss and bound by a survival they'd found in each other. Their kiss was not light. It was an act of recognition. It tasted like tears and forgiveness, the culmination of shame, honesty, and a painful mutual understanding that had been months in the making. Marcus had sought forgiveness through wealth and work. Now, he received it through physical grace. His hands framed her face gently, like she was precious and breakable, a fragile, sacred vessel he was terrified of damaging. Elise's response was equally profound. She gripped his shirt, holding him tightly like he was real and staying. It was a rejection of the transactional world of wealth and a desperate affirmation of permanence. For the woman who had only relied on herself, this was the acceptance of a partner who saw her value. Neither rushed what's been earned through pain. This moment wasn't a reckless fling. It was a covenant. It was the meeting of two souls whose wounds finally aligned. The VC who had walled off his heart with an empire, and the single mom whose grief had birthed a lifeline. In the quiet drumming of the rain, they sealed a bond built not on metrics or money, but on survival, truth, and the shared certain knowledge that they had saved each other. The world Marcus had left behind would not let him go quietly. His sudden, genuine investment in mental health, a venture that defied all traditional revenue streams, sent shockwaves through his carefully guarded financial fortress. Marcus's board saw a liability, not a lifeline. They threatened to oust him for irrational investment in unprofitable ventures. To them, saving lives was not a metric. It was a mistake. They measured success in returns, not rehabilitation. Marcus faced the ultimate test. He could salvage his reputation, return to the comfortable isolation of his empire and stabilize his immense wealth. Or he could choose the mission that had saved his daughter and ultimately saved himself. He chose Elise's mission over his reputation. The decision was final. Marcus Blake, the man whose worth was once defined by his firm, was walking away from his firm. He traded the glass tower and the 47th floor view for a future defined by purpose. He didn't need the empire anymore. He needed to build something meaningful with his life. He needed to prove that the metrics that mattered couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. He left the coiled precision of his old self behind. Marcus, who had engineered himself to look like success, was now choosing to be truly valuable. He walked away from the armor of his wealth and toward a new life being built, piece by broken piece, with Elise and Claire. Having walked away from his empire, Marcus was learning to live by Elise's metrics. But their struggle was far from over. Even as their mission gained momentum, the brutal realities of operating a non-profit on thin margins caught up with them. Elise's landlord, cold to the crisis work being done inside, evicted her office for missed rent. The space built from grief was suddenly gone, threatening the stability of the vital service. Marcus responded not with a contract or a cash offer, but with an open home. He offered his penthouse floor space as the new headquarters. It was the ultimate merging of their two disparate worlds. The clinical height of his isolation transformed into a functional, empathetic command center. Elise accepted, but only on her terms, equal partnership terms. There would be no more charity, only mutual ownership of their mission and their lives. The move was symbolic.
Claire helped move boxes, joined by Elise's daughter, Sophie, befriending Claire with the uncomplicated acceptance only children offer. The penthouse, once defined by its expensive, empty distance, was now filled with purpose and the messy vitality of work, family, and shared effort. This was not just a relocation. It was a profound act of creation, a family forming from broken pieces. Marcus was finally building connection, and Elise was accepting that her work deserved resources matching its impact. The walls were down. The mission had a home. Marcus Blake's dramatic pivot, choosing mission over millions, didn't go unnoticed. His former competitors, seeing the undeniable validation of their app's impact and the sudden vacancy at his former firm, recognized a powerful, ethical opportunity. Investment offers flood in from competitors who saw his shift. The venture capital world, initially scornful, now wanted a piece of the lifeline. But the new Marcus and the unwavering Elise were not taking money from just anyone. They had learned the bitter lesson that wealth doesn't guarantee wisdom or empathy. They now applied a new metric: purpose. Together, they choose partners who understand that mental health isn't a revenue stream, but a lifeline worth protecting. They prioritized firms that valued the human element. Marcus had witnessed on the overnight line over the rapid, ruthless returns he once chased. They looked for investors who saw the app as a mission, not merely a market to be exploited. Elise's work deserved resources matching its impact, and Marcus ensured she got them ethically. He traded the isolated power of his old empire for the shared strength of a coalition committed to protecting vulnerable lives. They were building an institution, not just an application. Launch night arrived, a culmination of months of sacrifice, healing, and building. They had their partners, their funding, and their mission, but the intensity of the need was overwhelming. The app crashed. Overwhelming demand, thousands of people simultaneously seeking help, broke the system. The very need they sought to serve threatened to destroy the lifeline they had built. Check the server load. Where's the failover? Marcus and Elise, now a seamless operational unit, threw themselves into the breach. They troubleshot until dawn. The former VC, who once only monitored financial transactions, now monitored server logs and user queues, working side by side with the founder, fighting for every single potential user. Claire, unable to contribute technically but unwilling to leave, curled up on the office couch. She was safe, asleep amidst the chaos, a testament to the fact that the mission was still intact. As the sun began to filter through the penthouse windows, success was finally confirmed. The system was stabilized. The silence that followed the chaos was profound. Exhaustion replaced urgency. Elise's head, heavy with relief and fatigue, found its resting place on Marcus's shoulder. They sat in the aftermath, surrounded by empty coffee cups, crumpled notes, and the unconscious form of his daughter. Exhaustion and intimacy were intertwined. This was domesticity built on shared purpose, proof that their relationship was forged in battle and sustained by mutual effort. They hadn't just saved the app, they had saved their connection. 6 months later, the chaos of launch night was a distant memory. The app, born from grief and fortified by partnership, had saved hundreds of lives. The mission was successful. The team, Marcus, Elise, and Claire, was whole. Marcus had fully embraced his new metric: survival and connection. He had learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that success was meaningless if you're alone at the top.
He was finally ready to make a commitment that reflected his profound transformation. Marcus proposes, but not with a ring. The man who had once calculated net worth before learning names understood that his commitment couldn't be symbolized by an easily quantified gemstone. His proposal had to represent the true co-ownership of their shared purpose and their fragile new family. He proposed with a contract. This contract names you, Elise, and Claire as co-owners of everything I have. The mission was the ultimate sacrifice of his former identity, a legal declaration that his wealth and his life were now inextricably linked to the women who had saved him. It was a proposal that finally reconciled his empire with his heart. The mission finally understood what actually matters. Not the Gulf Streams or the tailored suits, but the fierce heart of Elise, the saved soul of his daughter Claire, and the quiet strength of the family they had formed from broken pieces. He chose human connection over capital,